In the old days in Bombay, even though I felt physically so close to you, you were so far away. Now, sitting here with you in Buddha Hall, where thousands of us move around you, compared to the room in Bombay, I feel so intimately and personally like I never did before. Have you dropped serious political talks and become more intimate and juicy? Your smile is happening more often than ever. Please comment.
In a very simple question, you have touched many implications. I would like to go into those implications. Because without understanding them, your question cannot be answered sincerely and authentically. The days in Bombay you were certainly physically close, but that very physical closeness destroyed the possibility of a deeper closeness, where the heart meets the heart and where the spirit dances with the spirit. It happens because if you are physically close, people start taking you for granted. Now nobody can take me for granted. Not even the Prime Minister of India. I live in seclusion, in isolation. It was possible in old days for anybody to come to me at any time. for any stupid question to ask. You will be amazed if I tell you about all the incidences that used to happen. I was traveling from Udaipur to Chittorgarh in Rajasthan. I was alone in the first class compartment. Suddenly I felt somebody is massaging my feet. I said, that who are you and why are you unnecessarily disturbing my sleep? He said, you keep quiet. I said, this is strange. These are my feet. He said, you simply keep quiet. I am very much angry and I am very much frustrated because I am also coming from the Udaipur camp for meditation. They did not allow me to massage your feet. And those guys were always surrounding you. So I thought that let us wait, because he will pass through Chittorgarh. So I left ahead of you and I have been waiting here. Now nobody can prevent me. And I know certainly you are so loving, you will not prevent. I said, I am loving and I don't want to prevent you, but you should be also compassionate towards me. Tired of a 7-day camp, I had just fallen asleep, but he won't listen. For 2 hours continuously, I had to persuade him that if you don't listen to me, then I will have to pull the chain and call the conductor. He said, my God, I have never thought about that. You can do that. I said, I have every birthright to protect myself. At least from people like you who can't see a simple thing that I am tired and I don't want to talk and I want to sleep. Only threatened, he landed on a small station somewhere. But from the window, he said, at least touch my head. I said, you have tired me for 2 hours continuously, massaging my feet. And now I have to massage your head. He said, you do it, otherwise I will enter in the compartment again. I had to do it. He was very happy. I was staying in a campus, a university campus, taking a meditation camp, and suddenly in the afternoon when I was sleeping, I became aware that somebody is walking on the roof. So I opened my eyes, and what I saw, a professor has removed a tile and he is looking at me. I said, hello. Why can't you come from the front door? Are you going to jump on me? He said, on the front door they don't allow me. They say you are asleep. And as a fact, you are not asleep, you are talking with me. When people think they can approach, ask, inquire at any time, I will be available tomorrow. What is the hurry today? This taking for granted creates the problem. You remain physically close, but spiritually far away. It is difficult for me to make an effort for thousands of people separately to be spiritually close towards me. And man's mind functions in a very strange way. If you go closer to him, he becomes afraid. He becomes more closed. If you want to open his heart, he becomes hard. He resists. The only thing possible was that I toured around the world inviting my would-be people and when they have started arriving, I have closed myself in a dark cell, where there is no possibility of anybody to reach. Strangely enough, this has opened thousands of hearts, because I am not making any effort to open their hearts. I am not interested in opening their hearts. They have suddenly become open. There is nothing to be afraid. And twice a day I am with you. You wait for me. Waiting in itself is a great meditation. Waiting in itself is the whole religiousness. Waiting for the unknown, waiting for the guest, waiting for the master, whatever form it takes, but waiting for the right season when you will also be blossoming, is the whole inquiry and the search of man. I could have come in the ashram as many times as possible. It is not far away. But I have never been in the office since 1974. I have never seen anything in the ashram except my room and the meeting place where I saw you, where I talk, it is not a sermon, it is not a discourse, it is simply outpouring of a heart who loves you and wants to reach you, who trusts you and wants to enter into your deepest core. Who wants to help you on the way. And knowingly I don't come because I want you not to take me for granted. I want you to wait for me. And sometimes I disappear, I don't come. But even then, lovingly you wait. that perhaps tomorrow I will be coming, or day after tomorrow. And those waiting days are not without significance. They are as significant as the days when I am with you. Just I want you to be absolutely free of me, absolutely independent. I don't impose any doctrine, any cult, any philosophy. I don't want followers. I simply want people who know freedom, who know love, who know the dignity of man, who know the peaks of awareness. Because only those who will know the peaks of awareness will be my friends. Only those who will go to the depths of love will be my friends. I talk to give you hints, not forcing anything on you, but simply whispering in your ear. It is said that if you want a woman to hear you, you have to whisper to somebody else. Don't talk directly. Nobody is going to hear you. But whisper to somebody else. And it will be more perfect if you can find another woman. Whisper anything and your wife will hear it. I am simply whispering to you things which cannot be managed into words, into language, things which need to be understood only in the silences of the heart. Perhaps in a gesture, or perhaps in the depths of the eyes. I come to you and Anandamurti, I have known you for almost more than 25 years. But here you have been in the ashram when I was away. Here you are in the ashram. I have never talked to you. Because I don't want to destroy the silence that is growing between me and you. I have not even said hello to you. And this is the same about everybody who is here. And there are few more things. In Bombay days, I was surrounded by the Indians. Now, to be with Indians, you have to be serious. Otherwise, they don't think you are a religious man. You will not believe me that in the whole Indian history of 10,000 years, there is not a single Indian joke. Laughter is simply a foreigner. India does not even allow laughter a tourist visa. You are saying in the old days in Bombay, even though I have felt physically so close to you, you were so far away. Now sitting here with you in Buddha Hall, where thousands of us move around you, compared to the room in Bombay, I feel you so intimately and personally. The reason simply is, now I am surrounded by my own people. They are not Indians, they are not Germans, they are not Americans. They don't have a religion, they don't have a race, they don't have a nation. They are purely individuals. It is a gathering of friends. It is because of this you can feel me intimately and personally, although I don't know where in the ashram you live. I have never invited you even for a cup of tea. And this way I am showing to you that what a spiritual relationship is. It does not depend on anything visible. It is purely invisible. An energy that transpires hearts, that makes them aflame. And they know in the deepest of their depths that they are part of this commune, part of me, and part of this universe. They have thrown away all limitations and have become citizens of the universe. You say, Bhagwan, have you dropped serious political talks and become more intimate and juicy? I am the same. But the people who were around me have changed many times. In these 35 years I have been working for raising consciousness of humanity. Many people have come and left, and it has been always good because they emptied some space for better people. It is a strange experience that those who have left me have always left place for a better quality of people. I have never been a loser. There was a time, just accidentally, because I was born in a Jaina family. Now, it is not my fault. You can call it is unfortunate. But naturally, because I was born in a certain religious group, they were the first people to surround me. When people started looking at me, asking me questions, feeling that something has happened into me, the first were bound to be Jainas because they were my relatives, they were my neighbors. It was obviously that they will be the first. Naturally, their questions were concerned with Jainism, with Mahavira. Their questions you cannot ask. It will never occur to you that this also can be a relevant question. I was staying in a Jaina family. The father of the family was almost 80 years old, and he has retired according to the tradition that after 75 years you should retire. He has retired outside the city in a small hut. The family provided food, care, but he lived alone there, chanting Jaina mantras, reading Jaina scriptures, and someone gave my first book, The Path. He was so much impressed by the book that he could not believe that all his learning of the scriptures was futile. Only this small book was enough. And this man who has written this book must be a saint. Otherwise, how can you write such great truths? And when he heard that I was staying in his family, his son was very much interested in me. He came to see me, and I said, "You unnecessarily for miles walked in this old age. You could have given a message, a phone. I could have come to you. Your son has a car, there is no problem." He said, "No, I wanted, to me this is a pilgrimage. In Jainism, only 24 masters are accepted in one circle of creation. Those 24 masters have happened. Mahavir was the last. That is 25 centuries before. And now still there are thousands of years which will remain empty. There will not be a Jaina master. They call the Tirthankara, the man who makes the path. The old man was very learned, and he said that if it was in my power, I would have declared you the 25th Tirthankara. But it is not according to the scriptures, and it is not into my power. but I respect you exactly as the 25th Tirthankara. I said, you should wait a little. You should watch a little. You may have to change your idea. He said, never. I will never change my idea. I have come to a definite conclusion. I have seen all Jaina scriptures. You go miles and you find so a small nourishment, and your small book is enough for a man who really wants to find the truth. It is enough. More than that is non-essential. It was evening time and the sun was setting, and the woman of the house came and said to me that it is time for your supper. Sun is setting. In a Jaina family, you have to eat before the sun sets. Otherwise, you have to remain hungry. But I said to the woman, don't be worried. Your father-in-law has come from miles to see me. It doesn't matter to me. I will eat a little later. Let me first converse with him, because he has been waiting for me for years. The moment the old man heard that I am going to eat in the night, he was so shocked. He said, what I am hearing? And I called you the 25th Tirthankara, and you are going to eat in the night. And I have been thinking that your book is the essential for all those who are the seekers of the path. And the reality is, you don't know even the ABC of religion. This is ABC of religion, that eating in the night is preparing your path towards hell. I said, I have told you, just wait, don't make decisions. But you didn't listen. You said you are determined. In fact, just to show you that how much determined you are, I have told the woman that I will eat after 1 hour. He said, really? Then forgive me. I touch your feet, just forgive me. I said, wait, you take decisions too quickly. He said, no, I am absolutely determined. This time I am not going to change. And he touched my feet, asked my forgiveness. I said, there is no difficulty to forgive because you have not committed any crime. But one thing you should understand, the 25th Tirthankara eats in the night. He said, you eat? He said, I'm saying myself, and if you want, you can wait, let the sun set, and things will be clear. He said, my God, then how you could manage to write such a book? I said, eating in the night or not has nothing to do with religion. But he was very much frustrated. He left and he told me when he was going that I am going to burn your book. I said, that's the right thing. But think before you burn it. You seem to be a very quick, decisive man. And each decision is absolute. I may not eat. And I was just joking when I said that I eat in the night. He said, really? Now, what do you do with such people? When I was surrounded with Jainas, I had to talk with these people things which have no importance, nothing. But those were the people, and these were their questions. Slowly, others started moving towards me. Jainas became a minority. Out of that minority, few are still here. Very few. Their percentage has fallen to 1% at the most. The second group that followed, which was certainly the closer group to the Jainas, Mahatma Gandhi has adopted a Jaina doctrine of non-violence. So all the Jainas became Gandhians. And all the Gandhians came close to Jainas. At least on one point they were in agreement. So when Jainas were becoming alert that I am a dangerous man, Gandhians followed. Their great leaders, Vinoba Bhave wanted to meet me. Shankar Rao Dev attended a meditation camp. Dada Dharmadhikari attended many meditation camps. Acharya Bhagavat attended many meditation camps. And because these were the thinkers of Gandhiism, all over India, Gandhians started interested in me. Again, I was surrounded by a certain group with a fixed ideology. The day I criticized Mahatma Gandhi, I was simply stating the fact, not even criticizing. Somebody has asked, what do you think about Mahatma Gandhi and his philosophy of non-violence? Now, you will not ask that kind of question. And I said that Mahatma Gandhi was simply a cunning politician. By adopting non-violence, he was managing many things. All the Jainas became his followers. They found a certain man who was in tune with them. Although he was not a Jaina, but he was at least %9 Jaina. I have a percentage about him. He was born a Hindu, but he was only 1% Hindu. He was born in Gujarat, a very Jaina philosophy dominated area. 9% he was a Jaina. And 90% he was a Christian. Thrice in his life, he was just on the verge to be converted to Christianity. So when I said to them that he managed by non-violence the Jainas, he also managed the upper class Hindus who are non-violent people. He also managed to influence Christian missionaries, Christians, because Jesus Christ's message is of love. And non-violence is another name of love. And these were not all the benefits of accepting non-violence. The most important thing was India has been for 2000 years a slave country. It has forgotten what it means to be independent. It is not yet independent. Its mind has become that of a slave. 2000 years is not a small time. In these 2000 years, a certain slave psychology has penetrated the Indian mind. They have become cowards. India has never invaded anybody. Small invaders, uncultured, uneducated, Mongols, Turks, Hunas, very small tribes from Central Asia simply came, and they were not even given resistance. India has lost the nerve to fight. So when Gandhi said non-violence, the whole India was absolutely convinced with him, because there is no question of fighting. Indians are very much afraid of fighting. They have never fought. A small group could manage this vast continent to keep it a slave. From one group to another, the ownership changed, but India remained a slave. Secondly, Gandhi was intelligent enough to see that on the one hand, Indians are not the people who will fight. On the second hand, they don't have any weapons to fight. On the third hand, the British Empire of that day was the greatest power in the world. It was impossible to fight violently with the British Empire. You don't have weapons, you don't have trained people to fight, you don't know anything about fighting. It was a political policy. It served many purposes and served well. It served British Empire and it destroyed British Empire too. Because Britain was absolutely ready if Indians were going to fight. But they will not fight, even if There were British soldiers killing Indians. They will simply stand and be killed. All over the world, the British Empire was condemned that this is absolutely stupid. People who are not fighting, who are not terrorists, who are not revolutionaries, who are simply asking their freedom, and instead of giving them freedom, you give them a bullet in the chest. Unarmed people. Britain was in a very awkward situation. You could arrest the people who were following Gandhi, and they were ready to be arrested. You can put them in jail, but how many you can put in jail? And what is the point? Sooner or later you will have to release them, because this is unnecessary burden on you. Feeding them, clothing them. And thousands more were coming every day to be arrested. Before every jail, before every court, people were standing to be arrested. We want freedom or arrest us. Nowhere in the world such a situation has ever happened. Britain got puzzled. It looked inhuman to kill these people, it looked inhuman to jail these people, and a worldwide condemnation. And finally, the whole empire collapsed, because India was the central beam. Once India was free, other smaller countries started becoming free. And with India gone out of British Empire, Britain itself has become such a small power that it is not counted at all as far as great powers are concerned. It was the topmost. So when I said that Gandhi's non-violence was not a spiritual philosophy, but a political policy, and it is proved by the facts, he has promised before independence that the moment India becomes free, all armies will be dissolved, all arms should be thrown into the ocean. When asked that if you do this and somebody attacks, what you are going to do? He said, we will receive them as our guests, and we will say them, we stay here, you also stay. And after independence, everything was forgotten. Neither the armies were dissolved, nor the arms were thrown to the ocean. On the contrary, Gandhi himself blessed the first attack on Pakistan. 3 Indian Air Force planes came to receive his blessings, and he came out of his house and blessed the planes. All non-violence and all that bullshit talk that he was doing his whole life was forgotten. The moment I criticized Gandhi, and this was only one point, I'm a man who loves to go deeper into everything. If I don't go, I don't go at all. Once I started, I had to condemn Mahatma Gandhi on 1001 grounds. On each point, Gandhians disappeared. Now I don't think even 1% Gandhians are present. Not here, even in India. Because they cannot be Gandhians if I am right. I have condemned him point by point. I have not changed. Just the people around me went on changing. When Gandhians disappeared, then the people who are communists, socialists, who are against Gandhiism, thought this is great chance. If I can support them, but I had not condemned Gandhi to support communism. I had never thought about it that this will become an opportunity for socialists and communists and then I had to condemn them. There is no other way to get rid of such people. So all those political talks were a necessity to find out exactly my people who are without any prejudice, who have come to me, who have not come to me to listen about Christ, or to listen about Buddha, or to listen about Gandhi, or to listen about Mahavira, who have come directly to listen to me. I have my own message. I have my own manifesto to the world. So the people who are here have a totally different quality. I can talk to you without ever thinking that it can hurt you, without ever thinking that I have to somehow say things which you like. Now I can say things which my own experience, my own existential being is ready to express. I have never been a serious person, but I was surrounded by serious people for many years. And amongst those serious people, it is very difficult not to be serious. It is almost being in a hospital. You have at least to pretend that you are serious. For years I was surrounded by sick people, and I had to pretend at least that I am serious. I am not serious at all because existence is not serious. It is so playful, so full of song and so full of music and so full of subtle laughter. It has no purpose. It is not business-like. It is pure joy, sheer dance out of overflowing energy. Now I can talk to you as if I am talking to myself. There is no problem. Just the other day, Chaitanya Kirti must have been translating few of my talks into Hindi, and he was puzzled how to translate the jokes. Because the Indians will not be able to swallow those jokes, will get stuck in their throats. So I told Chaitanya Kirti, you are an Indian and you know perfectly well what will be troublesome, drop it. You are not only translating in Indian language, you are also translating for Indians. keep in mind that they cannot understand jokes. You are in a totally different climate, in a different atmosphere. They are not in the same situation. They are afraid to enter the door. I had the ear infection, and the specialist, Dr. Jog, was called. He could not believe that such a beautiful ashram exists in Pune, and he lives in Pune, is the topmost expert, and he passes, looks at the door, looks at the people, but he had never dared to enter. And then he said, when I told to my wife that it is a beautiful place and beautiful people, full of laughter and joy, it is nothing like third-rate yellow newspapers go on printing about it, lies, absolute lies. She wanted to come. They both came. One Sunday when he is free. And when he came to see me again, he said, my wife wants to come. Whenever she can manage, I cannot come every Sunday. Because that is the only free time for conferences, for meetings, for this and that. But whenever I can come, I will come. Can she come alone? I said, there is no problem. Here, men are afraid of women. Women are not afraid of men. This is a totally different world. You can see the scene. The Swami is running away. And not one but many Mas are trying to catch hold. That where are you going? Get back. And he said one thing more, that she wants to see you 5 minutes alone. I said, there is no problem. Whenever you want, you inform, and she can see me. He himself wondered, what? She wants to see you alone. Fine. I said, that is your problem. That is not my problem. She may have some trouble with you. You may be torturing her or something you must be doing, because even that day I had seen, as I stopped, his wife seems to be intelligent, educated, and they were sitting just here. Her wife showed him the thumb. Perhaps he does not know that I have seen it. I never miss anything that is worth seeing. Now something serious. Prince Edward, the Queen's youngest son, takes a horse ride every morning in Hyde Park, and every day he sees the same beautiful girl sitting on a park bench. He soon falls madly in love with her, but is too shy to introduce himself. Not knowing what to do, he consults his elder brother, Charles, who is more experienced in such matters. Simple, says Charles, just paint your horse green. Green? Exclaims Edward. Yes, green, says Charles. Then next time you see her, she will say, your horse is green? And you can say, that's right, and my name is Prince Edward. And then you can take her for a drink. And then you can invite her for a weekend in Scotland. And if you play your cards right, you may end up with a romp in the heather. Great, says Edward. And the next morning he arrives in the park with a green horse. The girl looks up, sees him, and cries, my God, your horse is green. Yes, says Edward, and then he stammers, well, I wanna fuck you. continuing their tour of India, Jaime Goldberg and Becky Goldberg go trekking in the Himalayas. Walking along the path, gazing at the mountain scenery, Jaime bumps straight into a Yeti, one of the legendary abominable snowmen. The Yeti picks up Jaime and runs off into the hills, leaving Becky wailing and crying that she will never see her Jaime again. Sure enough, a few minutes later, there is a piercing shriek that echoes around the mountains, and Becky fears the worst. But a short while later, Jaime comes limping down the path into Becky's arms. What happened? She cries in relief. How did you escape? Well, says Jaime reluctantly, I thought I was finished. All twisted up in the creature's arms until I could not breathe. And then I saw this pair of balls hanging in front of my nose. So with my last energy, I bit the balls as hard as I could. And you have no idea how much strength a man gets when he bites his own balls.